Now, first of all, I'd like to thank the Dublin Institute and the school and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present the database we're being constructing in Pavia. And so it's a great honor for me. Now, here's the roadmap, the content of today's talk. I will first briefly describe what is PaVeDa, Pavia Verbs Database, and its relationship to its parent, the Valency Partner Leipzig database. Then I will illustrate the procedure I followed in extracting the data from Corpus Paleobernicum. And I will talk about, well, this is the sample of Old Irish verbs, the issues that emerged in collecting the data for verbs and for the frames, the valency frames associated. And then I will say a few words regarding the alternations. And in the end, I will talk about possible applications and planned and future work related to the database. Now, what is PaVeDa, Pavia Verbs Database? It's an open source database for a device for investigating verbal argument structure across languages, and it incorporates, expands, and enhances the Valency Partner Leipzig database, adding new languages, in particular ancient languages, but also modern languages, and adding new features, in particular one new function I will illustrate. Now, these are the website. Both databases are accessible online, but Old Irish is still in the test version, so it's not publicly available, but it will be in the near future. Now, the VALPA database was published in 2013 and companion volumes in 2015. It was and it is a groundbreaking tool to support and systematize research on verb classes. It collected data for 80 core verb meanings that, while following the literature, were considered representative of the verbal lexicon. Some other meanings were added, or proxies, up to 172 verb meanings, which were not available for all the languages. Now we've reached number of 175. For Old Irish, the database contains only 93 verb meanings, and the database collected their equivalents in 36, contained their equivalents in 36 languages with coding frames, that is the case marking, indexing or agreement, and word order, and micro-roles for each verb. I will show what micro-roles are, basic pattern and alternations and examples, and all examples are glossed. What is in the PaVeDa? Just to put the cart before the horse, before I explain how I made up this. This is the part of the page for the counterpart for burn transitive in Old Irish. So the verb, you have a micro table where you see the micro, burner, and birth thing. The coding set, so the nominative in square bracket, you have the agreement, and so the burn thing in the accusative. Then you have a conventional names for the argument type, which are useful to be able to compare languages. So A is the conventional label for the subject of transitive verb, and P for the object. In the micro table, there are conventional symbols. So the square brackets, as I said, for agreement. Rounded brackets are used for optional arguments. And the symbol greater than, which you don't see here, is used when word order is the relevant feature used to code an argument relationship. This for Old Irish only holds the decisions are made for the construction with noun phrase, do and verbal noun, where it is the position of the verbal noun that codes the relationship of the noun phrase with the following verb. Then you have examples. They are coded examples. Here you have an example, and the examples are mainly taken from Corf, as we shall see. And in the same page, you also have at the bottom the alternations. We'll come back to the alternations, as I said, later on. So, for example, the passive and the various constructions with the verbal noun are tested for this verb at Luscade. And if you click on the specific alternation, in this case the passive with la agent, you get to all the verbs that are attested in the same construction, and you have a description. And if you click on the details you see on the right side, you'll get to the examples, the gloss examples. And if you click on the number of the examples, we might have the time to try some of these. If you click on the number of the examples, you will be brought to the source, and if it is available online, to the online source, so to Corf in both cases. So why we decided to expand the Valpa database? There are a number of issues in this database, but in particular would like now to focus on a few of them. So there are no data for ancient languages, and examples were based mainly on speakers' intuition. So the scholars constructed the examples or were taken from secondary literature, and only occasionally were the example extracted for corpora or elicited during fieldwork. The database, the original database, also does not support comparative visualization of construction and alternations. So our aim is to investigate valency patterns also across, not only across languages, but over time. And this is the new function you find in PaVeDa, the possibility to compare directly languages, including, you can put a language and their meaning, and you get all the data I've shown for Old Irish for the languages chosen. So regarding data coverage, as I said, we are adding both modern and ancient languages. In particular, I would like to say a few words regarding the ancient languages. These are the ancient languages are going to be included. The underlined ones are already online, so they are accessible. The languages whose modern stages are already in Valpa or already published. So there will be early and classical Latin, Old Church Slavonic, classical Armenian, Old and Middle English, Old High German, and Old Norse. There are also languages whose modern stages or close relatives will be or are already in PaVeDa, like ancient Greek, the Greek, Sanskrit, and Avestan. Modern Greek is already there. Hindi and Farsi will be there. And there are also Indo-European languages, ancient or medieval Indo-European languages, which do not have direct modern descendants. Gothic is already there, Hittite and Tocharian. And languages whose modern descendants are not yet included in the database. Old Irish, Window Welsh will certainly be there, and Old Lithuanian. I can tell you now that I'm fairly confident that modern Irish will also be there. And I'll say a few words in the end. So data extraction to get back to how the database has been constructed. So as I said, we decided to use corpora of course, for ancient languages, and to apply the methodology throughout, also for modern languages. And of course, there is a methodological assumption that corpora are representative. There are issues, of course, and we'll come back to that. So the procedure was basically to look for the meaning in Éireann, in the advanced search in Éireann, and then sort out the most frequent results in Corf, and cross-check that with the results in Corf. If Éireann gave no results, or both Éireann and Corf gave no results, synonyms or proxies were searched for. So, for example, wink for blink. Now, Corf is a medium-sized corpus. For example, for Gothic, you have a very small corpus. So all examples have been taken into account. For a Greek, for example, the corpus is a closed corpus, but a much bigger corpus. So when occurrences were too many, just 100 random occurrences were taken into account. According to my counts, my own counts, I wait to be disproved. Corf contains 13,000 more or less verb occurrences, and 5,300 verbal noun occurrences. What I've done is I've taken into account all occurrences, just a few verbs, just two in the sample. In the sample, vowel meanings have more than 100 occurrences, in fact, in Corf. So all occurrences have been included, well, taken into account. These are the criteria used to select the meaning counterpart and the frames. Most frequent in the corpus, most frequent pattern occurring in the corpus, and also to sort out the verb, we decided to choose simple verbs over compound verbs and over complex expressions. And of course, the meaning of the verb should be as close as possible to the vowel. Give an example. For all meanings, there are examples in vowel. They're representative of the intended meaning. So, issues in the selection of verbs. This is a list, the list of all the verbs that are now, the Old Irish verbs that are now in the database. I cannot, of course, go all through them. I'll just mention a few of the issues that emerged in collecting the data. And so, for example, for eat, the meaning eat, Ithith was chosen against, for example, Arberbuth, although Arberbuth is more frequent, but it also has other meanings. And as I said, Ithith is a simple verb. For laugh, for Atvi was chosen, which is attested in the corpus as against the simple verb tivith. And in the example which is from the Turin glosses, it is also the closest example, the meaning as in the VALPA database. Well, sometimes other criteria entered. For example, I selected Ascended. rather than adfid, because, well, it borrows, adfid borrows its verbal noun. And sometimes there were conflicting criteria, so there was no decisive criterion. And so two counterparts were chosen, for example, for name, both the simple verb I'm nigidir and asber do. In some cases, this was due to the fact that there were differences in meaning. For example, for meat, I inserted, well, the database contains both conrich, ekdo, ekvang, encounter, and meet by chance. For play, kluhigidir, which is used without any object, so to play, while imber is used when a specific game is played. For talk, laurithir and atgladathar, which profile different micro arguments. So laurithir may have the topic of oral language as an argument, while atgladathar has the addressee. And in other cases, as for name, there was no decisive criterion, and so feel pain has two counterparts, atagalar for or kitabi fahid, or something, some synonymous word. For nigid, well, for wash, I was able to trace a hypernym, but it's interesting to note that a lot of hypernyms of nigid are found or attested in Corf. Sometimes there were no counterparts, and this happened, for example, for the meanings hag and kaf. How do you say to kaf and to hag in Old Irish? So I was able to find something which was a close counterpart, to throw one's hand or one's arms around for hag. And for kaf, I reconstructed a complex expression relying on modern Irish with doni and kozachtach or kazachtach, meaning cough. In other cases, as I already alluded to, I relied on praxis. This was normal procedure in the database. So for blink, I selected shmeidith, which in fact means to wink, to nod. For load and roll, no real counterparts could be found, so probably just put a load on and roll. I found examples. I put examples where this was the meaning, and for roll, just run set of a round-shaped object. I'll see probably, well, you have the examples here. And sometimes you also have a single verb for two meanings. For example, for bring and carry, for sit and sit down. So the difference here is where it relies on the valency pattern. So for example, for bring, you have do and dative. For carry, co and accusative. This is based on the given example in Valpal, so sticks to that. And for Saviv, to sit implies a location, while to sit down occurs without a location. And for Baiviv, for a sink and sink transitive and a sink intransitive, you just have the single verb used in the passive and in the active. And Gaivid also, which is the counterpart for take, is also used in the expression corresponding to dress. And, well, yes, for load, dobeir, so put, and reithith, roll. A few meanings were added. For example, for Latin, some meanings were added in order to be able to include in the database constructions which otherwise would not have been there. For example, the construction where the experiencer is coded as an accusative. And so, for example, me pudet, I'm ashamed. So new meanings were added which were not in the original sample. For Old Irish, the added meanings are punish. The fich has particular, well, some specific infrequent alternations. Ferkagidir for be angry, so that's the new meaning, which is a label verb. For forget and forgive, the counterparts for forget and forgive were also added. And also meanings which were already there but outside the original core sample of 80 meanings. The transitive counterparts to boil, burn, be dry, and sink, which I already mentioned. So these meanings are also in the database. So the selection of the frames, so the basic construction for each verb, the database has a basic construction, as we have seen for Losketh, for example, the transitive construction, and then the alternation. So how do we choose the basic frame? Sometimes there are problems. For Gwydydd, the most frequent construction without ASCII. Well, ASCII is the conventional name in the database for the person you ask for something. And so the construction with 2 arguments was chosen as the basic one, and the construction with the ASCII, whether promoted to direct object or with do and dative, are included in the alternation, so the alternative constructions. For gathered, for example, steal, 2 examples occur in Corf, one with the preposition de, the other one with the preposition are, coding the person from which something is stolen. But de occurs in poetry, and I also went to look in Bretha and Gata, the fragmentary tract on thefts, to look, and there, well, you find many examples where are and accusative. Well, the accusative has been decided on the basis of an occurrence in Word's book, where it means to deprive. Frequency. Sometimes frequency cannot be the only criterion to decide which is the basic one. So, for example, for Linith, just to give you an example, for Linith, most of the examples are in the passive in Corf, but so the transitive pattern was considered the basic one, and the passive as an alternation. For Labyrinth, well, the construction with a direct object is in fact constrained because it only occurs within an infix or in a relative construction, so you don't have an example with a noun. There are also issues that stem from the problem I was mentioning regarding, for example, sink, transitive and intransitive, or boil, transitive and intransitive. Which is the basic one, the intransitive or the transitive one? Well, there's no principled way to answer these questions, and well, sometimes Valpal basically answer this question on the basis of English, which is let's say the working language, but this is, well, not really what would one expect. For example, for Botha is, well, the counterpart for frighten, although it's a label verb. What's a label verb? It's a verb which can have a subject, well, can have a causative meaning. So, for example, frighten, to make one fear, or a non-causative meaning. So, for example, to fear. Phobotha occurs most frequently as an intransitive, but since it was chosen as the counterpart for frightened, therefore the transitive construction was chosen. Sometimes the basic frame had to be inferred from a construction which, well, because you just had one example in the corpus. For example, for Kitabi Fakit, well, there is an example where rather than the pain feeler, so the experiencer, you have the pain locus as a subject, so the part that feels pain. So the transitive construction with pain feeler as subject has been inferred. For peel and touch as well, the transitive patterns were deduced from the passive, which was attested in Edil, but there were no examples in Corf. There's also the problem with the motion verbs. With motion verbs, the goal may be coded with very different prepositions, and this problem has been addressed by Aspelmark, for example. He calls this as a direction, as an adverbial argument. What I did basically for Old Irish is to choose the most frequent preposition that occurred in Corf in the database, and then list simply all the other locative prepositions that could occur. Like, for example, for carry, go was chosen because, well, it occurred most frequently with the examples close to the given example in Valpa. Classification of basic frames. So overall, one of the goals of the database is also to classify the frames, so classify the verbs that occur in the languages of the world. And according to this cross-linguistic framework, Old Irish has a lot of one-place predicates, but very much two-place transitive predicates. Then you have two-place non-transitives and three-place predicates. So predicates that require this number of arguments and which code them in particular ways. It's interesting to note, well, first of all, we'll come back to this, that it has a lot of transitive verbs in this sample, because, well, that's comparable to other languages in this sample. So, for example, Latin and English, Old English, which is in the PaVeDa, have a comparable number of two-place transitive verbs, but slightly lower. So it's it has a high number of two-place transitive verbs. It's interesting to note that there's no clear evidence from this sample of availent predicates. So you don't have third-person indexes. Well, you always have third-person inflection in Old Irish, but non-referential third-person indexes would be in availent predicates. So whether verbs, which are the ones which may be usually availent predicates, for example, they are so in Italian, usually occur with nominal subjects. So in the sample, you only have rain, sneaketh, but also other occur with the subject. The most consistent class from a semantic point of view is the two-place non-transitives, which imply a locative argument. So verbs, motion or position verbs like climb, live, meet, or sit, or verbs, experiencer verbs, where the experiencer is coded as a locative, so to say. Experiential predicates, this, well, I will see that will become important later on. appear in all classes. And the sample features only one predicate with no nominative argument, so an impersonal one, which is one of the two counterparts for need, though echoing. Okay, so I won't dwell on this because it's late, but if you're interested, I'll say a couple of words. So the alternations. In the database, in the framework of the ValPal database and the PaVeDa database, the alternations are divided into two groups. The coded alternations, which imply a modification of the verb forms, and uncoded alternations that are only coded on the arguments. So for Old Irish, the coded alternations are the passive, the reflexive, which implies infixes, the various non-finite constructions with the verbal nouns, and the reciprocal with im, which occurs quite rarely in the corpus. The uncoded ones, well, I've just put here a few because there are many more. The so-called dative alternations or secundative alignment, which only occurs with for kind, teach, and guided, ask for, whereby the recipient-like argument, so the person taught and the ASCII are coded as direct object rather than obliques. The applicative, so which is the process whereby motion or position verbs are made transitive, so to climb something rather than to climb on something, and Dringed, for example, has this possibility. Taighde as well has construction with the direct object rather than an oblique goal, and live and run. You also have a promotion of obliques with Congair, which is the counterpart to shout at, and of punish. Lability, I already mentioned that, is attested in the sample for these two verbs, to frighten and to be angry. And again, the connotative obli-patient alternation, well, this is the alternation with which is traditionally exemplified with to shout someone, to shoot someone or to shoot at someone. So where the direct object is, on the other hand, coded as an oblique, and this occurs with tell and punish. Now, this is a list of all the kinds of verbal noun constructions that I found with the verbs in the sample. So very many verbal noun constructions. I'll just to show a page of the database. I have tried to classify the verbal noun construction from the point of view of the valency frames, so of the relationship of the verb with their argument. And this is the result, basically. The direct object in the genitive case and the a argument may surface flagged with different preposition, do, la, or o. Then a or as, remember these are the cross-linguistic labels for these arguments. In the genitive case, and this occurs with one or two place non-transitive, but rarely also with transitive verbs, for example, with for Taighde, for kind, and of fich. Or only prepositional arguments occur, or there's only control. This occurs with one place predicates, so no overt argument. And then with the construction with do and verbal noun, any argument may be raised, and this occurs with all kind of frames. So one place, two place, or three place, transitive and intransitive verbs. Applications, planned and future work. Okay, I'll just mention very briefly applications which have already been done. I'll mention two papers. One published by myself in the last issue of Studia Celtica Postnaniensia, which deals with the transitive predicate behavior in particular, so verbs that have three arguments and may have different alternations, like, for example, to teach, and also with lability, the phenomenon I mentioned before. And another one by myself, by my colleague Chiara Zanchi and myself, which has recently appeared in the 42nd, in the proceedings of the 42nd Harvard Celtic Colloquium, which deals with basic valency orientation in Old Irish and also with the transitive predicates. Basic valency orientation is a typological parameter, which was devised a few years ago by John and Nichols in particular. It's the way, said very briefly, the way the lexicon of a language is organized, whether it basically derives transitive causative counterparts from intransitive ones or the other way around. Okay, so I've tried to classify Old Irish according to this parameter. Prospective studies. First of all, comparative perspectives on valency patterns in ancient Indo-European languages, and I will dwell on this a little bit, and possibly the evolution of valency patterns from Old to Modern Irish. I would also suggest that the database could be a support for the learning of Old Irish syntax, since there are over 300 glossed and classified examples. And the methodology and the framework can also be applied to a specific genre of Old Irish text, and I've just begun to apply this scheme to verbs in early Irish low text. Well, I will just skip this, maybe just a few words, but as I said, the study of the transitive predicates in Old Irish has already been published in these two papers. The only two verbs in the sample that appear to allow the promotion of an oblique to a direct object, a recipient-like argument, are Forkine and Griffith. It is interesting to note that Maynooth is not attested at all in Corf. It is attested in Würzburg, however, and in Würzburg as well, in 2 out of the 3 occurrences of this verb, you have the promotion of the direct object, in fact, in 2 reflexive occurrences. So 2 different verbs, but with similar meaning and similar syntactic behavior. Comparative perspectives on valency patterns in Indo-European languages. Now we are going, the Pavia team is going to publish 2 volumes, which have already been accepted for publication in the series, the Grutus series, Comparative Handbooks in Linguistics. And the first of them will be completely dedicated to ancient Indo-European languages, and so the comparison of the valency pattern in ancient Indo-European languages. I would also like to say a few words regarding one previous study on this matter, so valency patterns in ancient Indo-European languages. This paper by Carlotta Viti, published in 2017 in Diachronica. Now, Diachronica is, I would say, a very important journal in historical linguistics. And in this paper, VT investigates the coding of the experiencer argument, in particular the opposition between nominative coding versus oblique coding of the experiencer argument with predicates of volition, cognition, propositional attitude, psychological experience, and physical perception in all these languages: Hittite, Old Indic, Old Greek, Latin, Irish, Icelandic, Lithuanian, Old Church Slavonic, Classical Armenian, Tocharian, and Albanian. And she sets up, using her data, an implicational hierarchy for Indo-European languages, which predicts that on the leftmost part of the hierarchy, the experiencer is more likely to be coded as an oblique, while on the right parts, the predicates of cognition, volition, and propositional attitude, like to know, to want, to think, the experiencer is likelier to be coded as a subject. So what she found is that know, will, and think were coded in the ancient Indo-European languages all the way through with the nominative, except Irish. And so in Irish, all position in the hierarchy, this is a quotation, even the lowest position concerning predicates of cognition, volition, and propositional attitude are maximally expressed by construction with an oblique experiencer. Unfortunately, what she used was modern Irish, and her sources are Learning Irish by O'Shea, which is a book I love, but not very useful, I think, to gather data on ancient Indo-European languages. Another assumption in the study, well, not only in this study, but in general, because she quotes other sources, is that the evolution from nominative marking to non-nominative marking is usually less frequent than its opposite, and usually due to content factors. Now, I would say that the fact that the misplacement of the Irish data in this paper does not necessarily disprove her conclusions, where in fact I think they don't. But nevertheless, they prove, in my view, that data on Old Irish syntax are not easily available, even to Indo-Europeanists. And of course, the conclusion that the evolution from nominative, non-nominative marking due to content factors is, I think, hardly applicable to the evolution from Old to Modern Irish. I would suggest main internal factors. I cannot dwell on this for the moment, but I hope I will be able to as soon as all the data for Modern Irish are collected. And I can now be confident that, as I said before, Modern Irish will also be in the PaVeDa. I've collected some almost half of the counterparts to the Old Irish predicate using the new Old Irish dictionary and selecting the frames and the examples from the Corpus Notionnta na Gaeilge with support from the Briathra section of Potafocal. Now, the problem here is that, of course, the corpus is much bigger than the Corpus Paleobernicum, so it's not so easily manageable. The examples are a lot, but I'm fairly confident, and Andrea Palandri has accepted to help me somehow, so I hope Modern Irish will be there. Well, I don't think I have time to just give you an example of what can be found. This is an example of the counterparts for help, which are completely different for Old and Modern Irish. Old Irish as a transitive verb, Modern Irish an intransitive verb, But still, what happens is that the Old Irish verb has some construction that behave like a transitive verb, like an intransitive verb, sorry, while the modern Irish counterpart, which is an intransitive verb, behaves like a transitive verb, in particular verbal noun constructions. In the end, application of the framework to specific genre verbs in the low text have up to now collected over 400 frames with examples and classification of their micro-roles. From these texts, and I'll go on collecting data. So I hope I will have a sort of little database of the verb frames, the valency patterns of verbs attested in the early Irish low texts. Very useful, I suppose, for learners. In particular, well, I can just give you examples of what can be gleaned from the data. For example, constructions with doni as a light verb, so constructed with a verbal noun. One examples that occurred to me, doni with frignum, to attend courses. Possibly that is a meaning that could be applied also to the verb friskni. And other examples, just to mention a few. How do you say to pay something in Old Irish? So many ways, but collecting the data will give you an idea of how, for example, Torein is different from Asrein. They appear to be, very close meanings, but they occur in slightly different construction. Now, I would like to say most of these constructions for the Old Irish verbs are in fact in ideal. They are not so transparent to the learners, and sometimes they're not in ideal. I mean, they're not so clearly classified, and I would say this is an example, Taighde, in the meaning to go in compensation for. Concluding remarks. Now, the Pavia verbs database allows to include Old Irish in comparative and cross-linguistic studies on valency, which is the very important, interface between syntax and semantics. There are, of course, issues related with the fact that we're dealing with a corpus language, and the available corpora may not represent certain genre, which may attest to certain verb meanings or constructions, and the choices that one has to make in choosing the counterparts have consequences. But there are counterbalances and, anyway, advantages in collecting this data. So the addition of examples outside the corpus, so allow it to expand the sources, the application to specific genre, as I already mentioned, and the fact that, anyway, this is an advantage. You can use this data to conduct systematic, consistent, and principled research on the diachronic evolution of valency patterns. And I thank you.